You say something in front of a group of people, and the second it leaves your mouth, you know it was wrong. Not dangerous, not even particularly serious. Just wrong, in that specific, mortifying way where everyone briefly goes quiet and you can feel heat rushing directly into your own face, completely against your will. You didn't decide to blush. You couldn't have stopped it if you tried. Here's the thing nobody tells you about that feeling. It might be one of the strangest, most specifically human things your body does. And one biologist found it so strange, he devoted an entire chapter of a book to it, more than a century and a half ago. So let's actually answer the question properly. Did ancient humans get embarrassed? Let that sink in for a second, because to answer it, we have to start somewhere you wouldn't expect. Not with pottery, or tools, or bones. With your own face, right now, and what happens to it when you feel exposed. In 1872, Charles Darwin published a book called The Expression of the Emotions in Man and Animals. And the final chapter, the one he chose to end the entire book on, wasn't about fear, or anger, or grief. It was about blushing. Darwin wrote a single line that still gets quoted constantly today. Blushing, he said, is the most peculiar and the most human of all expressions. And then he added something considerably more pointed. Monkeys redden from passion, he wrote. But it would require an overwhelming amount of evidence to make us believe that any animal could blush. Let that sit for a moment, because it's a genuinely strange claim for an evolutionary biologist to make. Darwin spent his entire career finding continuity between humans and animals, arguing that our emotions, our expressions, our instincts all had deep roots shared with other species. And here, on the very last page of his book on emotional expression, he essentially says, actually, this one might just be ours alone. So why did Darwin land there? Let's start with the mechanism, because blushing itself is genuinely strange once you look closely at it. Blushing happens when small blood vessels near the surface of your skin, mostly in your face, ears, and neck, suddenly relax and widen, letting more blood flow directly beneath the surface. That's it. That's the entire physical event. But here's what makes it unusual. It's controlled by your autonomic nervous system, the same system responsible for your heartbeat and your digestion, systems you have zero conscious control over. You cannot make yourself blush on command, no matter how hard you try, and you generally cannot stop yourself from blushing once the response has already started, no matter how badly you want to. Darwin himself pointed this out directly. He called it entirely involuntary, which raises an obvious, uncomfortable question. Why would evolution build a response that is, in almost every practical sense, actively working against the person experiencing it? A blush doesn't help you fight. It doesn't help you run. If anything, it does the exact opposite of what you'd want in an embarrassing moment. It broadcasts your discomfort to literally everyone around you at the precise moment you'd most want to hide it. Darwin didn't just theorize about this from his armchair either. He conducted what was, for the time, a genuinely serious research project. He wrote to friends, missionaries, and colleagues stationed all over the world, asking a very specific set of questions. Do people in your region blush? Does it happen the same way across different races? At what age do children start? Do blind individuals blush? The answers that came back, from correspondents observing dramatically different cultures with essentially no contact with each other, were remarkably consistent. Blushing showed up everywhere his network could check. Every population he received reports on. He even specifically investigated whether skin color changed the picture, and found cases described to him, including one involving an albino woman, where a faint reddening was still visible despite normally darker pigmentation. To Darwin, this was strong evidence that blushing wasn't some regional cultural habit that had simply spread around through contact. It looked like something built into the species itself, showing up independently, everywhere humans existed. Now here's the detail that should genuinely surprise you, and it's one of the strangest findings buried in Darwin's original research. According to his own observations, and confirmed by later researchers, blind individuals do blush, including people who have been blind since birth and have therefore never once seen another human being's face do it. Think about what that actually implies. If blushing were purely something we learned by watching other people do it, the way you might learn to wave or nod, a person who has never seen anyone blush in their entire life shouldn't be able to produce the response at all. And yet they do. That's a genuinely strong piece of evidence that the underlying wiring for this reaction isn't copied through observation. It's already sitting there, built in, waiting for the right social trigger to switch it on. It's worth being honest, though, that the broader question of exactly how universal and how purely innate human facial and physiological expressions really are remains a genuinely active, sometimes heated area of debate in modern emotion science. Some researchers, most notably psychologist Lisa Feldman Barrett, have pushed back hard against the classical view that specific expressions map cleanly onto specific emotions across every culture and situation, arguing the real picture is considerably messier and more shaped by learned context than early researchers assumed. Blushing sits in an interesting middle ground here, because unlike a posed facial expression, it's a direct physiological event, blood vessels widening, that's considerably harder to fake or consciously perform, which is part of why it's held up reasonably well as a genuine signal, even as the wider science around universal expressions keeps getting more complicated. There's also a developmental piece to this worth understanding. Darwin's own research, and later work building on it, found that very young infants don't blush, even when placed in situations that would embarrass an older child or an adult. The response reliably shows up somewhat later, generally once a child has developed a specific cognitive skill, the ability to understand that other people are watching them and forming judgments about what they see. That's not a small detail. It means blushing isn't simply a reflex to stimulation, the way flinching from a loud noise is. It requires a genuine, functioning theory of mind, an understanding that other separate minds exist, that those minds are actively observing you right now, and that they're capable of judging you based on what they observe. Take that self-awareness away, and the blush doesn't happen. Which means blushing is, in a very real sense, a direct physical readout of a specifically social kind of thinking, one that has to develop first before the blush can ever appear at all. So if blushing genuinely seems to work against the person experiencing it in the moment, why would evolution keep it around instead of quietly deleting it somewhere along the way? This is where more recent research picks up exactly where Darwin left off, and the honest answer turns out to be genuinely clever. Psychologist Dr. Keltner at UC Berkeley has spent much of his career studying embarrassment specifically, and in a landmark 1995 study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, he proposed that embarrassment functions as what researchers call an appeasement display, closely related to submission and reconciliation behaviors documented across a wide range of social animals. When something goes visibly wrong in a social situation, an appeasement display sends an automatic, honest signal to everyone watching. I know I made an error. I'm not a threat. I recognize the social rule I just broke. Keltner's research found that embarrassment has its own genuinely distinct nonverbal pattern, separate from related but different emotions like shame or simple amusement, and that observers can reliably recognize it, and recognize it especially clearly when it's displayed by individuals from groups holding comparatively lower social status. A later study, published in 2011 by Matthew Feinberg, Rob Willer, and Keltner, pushed this idea even further, and the results are genuinely striking. The researchers found that when someone visibly displays embarrassment after a social mistake, other people watching don't just forgive them faster. They actively trust that person more and become measurably more willing to cooperate with them going forward. The study's own framing calls embarrassment a reliable, honest signal of pro-social intent, one that's genuinely difficult to fake convincingly. In other words, the exact reaction that feels like pure, unwanted exposure in the moment may be doing real social work behind the scenes, repairing your standing with the group faster than words alone ever could. Now put this together with what Darwin originally noticed, and a genuinely coherent picture starts to form. Blushing requires a developed sense that other minds exist and are actively judging you, a capability that shows up only once children reach a specific stage of social cognition. It appears consistently across radically different, disconnected human populations. It shows up even in people who have never once observed another person do it. And it functions, according to modern research, as an honest, hard-to-fake signal that measurably repairs trust and cooperation within a group after something has visibly gone wrong. Every one of those pieces points toward the same underlying conclusion. This isn't a random glitch left over in the human nervous system. It looks considerably more like a genuine piece of social technology, quietly built by evolution to help repair the exact kind of damage that group living inevitably creates. A mistake, a broken rule, a moment where you need everyone around you to know, immediately and unmistakably, that you understand exactly what just happened. Which brings us back to the actual question: did ancient humans get embarrassed? We obviously have no direct archaeological record of a blush, No fossilized red cheek preserved for tens of thousands of years, waiting to be excavated. But the underlying biological machinery required to produce one, the specific kind of social self-awareness, the fully involuntary physiological trigger, the appeasement function that only makes sense inside a group tightly bound together by ongoing cooperation and reputation. All of that almost certainly predates recorded history by an enormous margin. Humans have lived in socially complex, reputation-dependent groups for the overwhelming majority of our species' existence, and a signal this specifically tuned for exactly that kind of environment didn't spring into existence recently. It was very plausibly already there, quietly working, the entire time, doing precisely what it still does for you today, announcing, instantly and honestly, before you've even had the chance to consciously think about it, that you already know something just went wrong, and that everyone around you can trust you anyway.